The last thing I wanted to ask you is just bringing it just a couple of decades forward from our largely 60s based conversation today. What do you think about this difficult situation that Radiohead have found themselves in, where they're this band that has kind of built up a legacy as, kind of being quite progressive, being on the right side of history, standing up to the Iraq War? The Hail to the Thief album was all about the war on terror, this paranoid fucking Bush era, Blair era clampdown on civil liberties. There's that Thom Yorke solo track, Harrow Downhill, about David Kelly. And then suddenly, they're playing Israel and Thom Yorke's giving the finger to people who protest that. And then he's sharing Nick Cohen articles about how Corbyn's a bad guy, and he's sharing Change UK propaganda. Like this Mike Gapes looks like a political visionary. And then now, just literally yesterday, Thom Yorke stormed off stage in Australia because a pro-Palestine protester yelled something at him.
I mean, I hadn't followed all of this. I've been aware of the whole Israel thing. And before that, the last thing I was aware was, I didn't take it as sarcastic when he sang along with Jeremy Corbyn during their Radiohead's live set at Glastonbury in whenever that would have been, 2018 maybe?
I do not remember that at all.
Wow. But it didn't so at the time.
That is a piece of the puzzle that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't understand these things. I mean, did I misjudge Nick Cave's politics and attitudes all these years as well? But I mean, he wasn't as overtly kind of seeming to be left beforehand. I've had confusing with Radiohead. I mean, I guess people just, there's perhaps a sort of liberal leftism that will go so far, but then sort of hits a wall. I mean, I don't know, or have they just changed their attitudes as they've got older? I find it mystifying, because when I interviewed them all, and including Thom Yorke, in the Hail to the Thief time, you just couldn't stop them talking about politics from what sounded like a very radical perspective.
Well, they were kind of into like the anti-consumerism movement in the early 2000s as well. But really, they seemed very kind of animated by the Iraq War and the war on terror, like in opposition to it. And so that is why the kind of like, it would be terrible if Jeremy Corbyn became prime minister. Why do people want to boycott Israel? That's not nice. That's why that stuff seems confusing, for people who were animated by anti-war sentiment at one point. But I mean, there is the personal factor of Johnny Greenwood's wife being Israeli, and you could say, so what? She's Israeli. What? You don't know her views on the conflict? It's like, people do know her views. She's got Twitter. She's very, very pro the Israeli war effort. So I imagine that kind of personally complicates things for them. But I mean, more than just like having a go at them as individuals, and I do think that Yorke came off as a right prick in that video of him storming off stage. I just think it's really interesting that there's this band that has very much a radical aesthetic, and they've been driven into this quite reactionary political position.
I mean, as such, again, they exemplify a certain body of liberal opinion, don't they? Because there were sort of left liberals that were marching alongside me on the Iraq demos, who presumably still think that Iraq was a bad idea, but don't apply the same logic to the Israel situation. And I don't know what convolutions go on there, apart from the, just sort of being carried along by ideology, just by the work of the media, by the demonization of Corbyn, by the weaponization of anti-Semitism and so forth. And that's where certain people have just found themselves carried without necessarily consciously changing their views, just not sort of following through the logic of their younger selves' views in the political moment we're in now. Because the whole conversation has moved further to the right, massively since then. So I guess it's just carried certain people along with it. And Radiohead are an example of that. I mean, some of these things happened before, like people are slagging off Bono now, but Bono was completely silent about Iraq. The Manic Street Preachers were completely silent about Iraq. So there are all these...
It's worse than that with Bono, who's literally hanging out with George Bush constantly.
Well, exactly. And the Manic Street Preachers, just didn't have anything to say about Iraq, and quite overtly so, and have continued along a role of... And they also rejected Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, they did as well. But yeah, I mean, I think it's more of an issue with the Manics or with Radiohead or with these people who presented themselves as radical. than it is with like Nick Cave. Or I don't care that Noel Gallagher is a grumpy old reactionary. Like that just feels like, you know, entirely in keeping with what I know of the character of Noel Gallagher. It's nice to see that maybe Liam is developing his views a lot of the time, but I you know, it's kind of hard to pin Liam down to any particular position because he has a very special mind, shall we say. But yeah, it's like Nick Cave. I didn't think he was left wing. It's just I think he should stay out of politics altogether because it doesn't suit him.
Yeah, I mean, so who knows? Maybe Radiohead were never really left wing. It was just a liberal conscience. You know, we're better than this kind of thing. You know, because it's surprising how many people have a deep faith in sort of liberal institutions when it comes down to it, who can sound radical. And that, to me, is probably the best way of framing it, because if you have faith in liberal institutions, one of the liberal institutions is the Western alliance with Israel. In a sense, that becomes a sort of, you know, non-negotiable. You know, if you're invested in those things, that is a long historical thing that apparently quite radical members of the Labour Party in the past have been adherents of as well, you know. So there is a certain, I suppose, way of framing that it is logical.
I think that's true. It's just, it feels like he's no longer got his finger on the button. Like he's no longer in tune with the sentiments of like most of the kind of people who would listen to Radiohead, or at least, you know, be a very big, the kind of people who would care what Thom Yorke has to say about anything. It seems like he's kind of losing touch with what they have to say. But anyway, I know you want to go and have some dinner, so I'll let you go now, Toby. But it was really good to talk, and thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, I've really enjoyed it. It's been fantastic chatting.
Give the book another plug before you go.
Yeah, so my book, Mixing Modern Politics, A Marxist History of Popular Music, is available now from all good bookshops and is much more fun than the title might suggest, as hopefully our conversation has suggested.